Hello, my name is Michael Pipkin, and I'm going to be doing a presentation on the psychology of sport injuries. So, kind of to start off, um, what is like a sport, like the psychology of sport injury? So, basically, like the study of it is just kind of like to see the factors that kind of affect an athlete in sport. And not only just that, but it also kind of how that injury has affected that athlete, not only for their body, their physical body, but also themselves in their mind. Because something not a lot of people understand is that injuries not only cause physical harm to an athlete, but can also cause mental and psychological episodes and events and injury to that person as well. So that's basically what kind of like the idea of sports psychology is, or injury psychology. So some of like the main factors that can increase injury and cause injury are like high stress levels, anxiety, things like that. The graphic on the right side kind of shows that there is an optimal zone for athletes, and there is also a burnout zone. And a lot of the time, injuries do happen in that sort of burnout zone because a lot of times people don't realize how much fatigue, overtraining, stress, anxiety, all everything in their lives kind of just pours onto them, and then it kind of can affect how they play. And something that we kind of learned in the reading is that stress increases muscle tension, which causes slower reaction times, which can cause a higher risk of injury. This is in most like sports like basketball, soccer, football, especially because if you're not in the right mind, then you're not going to be able to perform properly. So kind of like the another idea is like the stress injury model. It's kind of like the idea that the higher stress you have, the higher chance of injury you have. And then you can kind of see this on the graph on the left. The more stress you have over time, it can cause exhaustion. And like we mentioned in the previous slides, exhaustion can and will cause injury because you're not in the right headspace. Some of the other things that can help moderate this is kind of like your own personality. If you're a happy person, you're stressed out, you're kind of less likely to be affected by that stress. If you've experienced certain stressors a lot, you'll be able to handle them better, and like just kind of how you cope with these sort of stresses that you have. A lot of the time, um, there is like a response to these type of injuries, and there's also stages to these injuries as well. Common like emotional responses are kind of like denial, which is like no way this happened to me, no way this happened to me, or like anger because of like how it happened, frustration because it happened, depression can be caused because you can't play the sport that you like anymore. And then like a main emotional response is fear of re-injuring. That is a big thing that causes athletes to end up hurting themselves again because they're fearful of hurting or re-injuring what they already injured. And then kind of like some more stages of injury response just kind of reinforces like not everybody goes through every single stage of this of like an injury response, but a lot of people experience at least one part of it. Um, Another big factor of injury psychology is rehabilitation. Rehabilitation is a big thing that people tend to miss when it comes to injuries because a lot of the time they either tend to focus on the actual physical rehabilitation, they don't do the physical rehabilitation, or they outright deny or forget about the physical part or the psychological part of that rehabilitation because like I mentioned previously, re-injury is a big fear for a lot of people, which causes people to end up hurting themselves more because they're not focused on being in the game. Um, you know, Motivation, goal setting, these are like very important things because if you don't have a clear goal, you're not going to want to adhere or even do rehabilitation. And pain, lack of motivation are all also things that can stop rehabilitation, which is something that we learn in sports psychology or injury psychology because you want to make sure that these people are able to rehabilitate themselves to get not only just back to playing their sport, just but also just to be able to live their life. Because if they're not able to live their life properly because of this injury, that's very detrimental to that person. Um, some very important psychological skills to help recover from an injury is like using your imagery. Is Imagery is a big thing when it comes to sports psychology, not just injury psychology, but sports psychology. If you can't imagine yourself doing it, then you're not really going to be prepared to actually do it. Relaxation, that goes back to burnout. Burnout is something that is extremely common and happens all the time. If you are not taking care of yourself by relaxing, talking to yourself, regulating your emotions, all through all of those things. If you're not doing that, you're going to burn yourself out, you're going to cause yourself to stress, and then you're going to hurt yourself because that's 90% of the time how injuries can happen. A big thing, like I kept saying, is the fear of re-injury. This is very common and has very, very vast amount of detriments that can happen to an athlete. Not only just not only can it just cause like more a higher chance of like you getting injured, but it also affects your performance. There's been many times where athletes get hurt, come back, and then they end up not playing the same because they're scared of hurting themselves even more, or they just can't perform. You know, like Kobe Bryant on this picture, he ended up hurting himself. A lot of times after he ends up getting hurt, he kind of has a little dip in his performance for a little while, and then he'll rebound back up. But he's not like most people. Most people tend to have a peak injury, dip down, and then it stays down. And it takes a lot longer for them to come back after that. Another big thing is if you should even return to the sport. Because if you do not do like the checklist that's right here, if you do not have every single one of those checked off, you shouldn't return to that sport because the chances of you getting re-injured exponentially increase. And that's not something you shouldn't be playing an injury because you're hurt. You shouldn't go back to that sport if you continuously get hurt by it. Finally, there is some very practical uses for these. Coaches should always be monitoring their athletes. If you see an athlete stress, pull them aside, talk to them. Your rehab should also include mental training. You can't just train the body and not train the mind. That's something that even ancient people realize. Communication between medical staff and athletes is very, very important because how is your athlete supposed to be able to perform what rehabilitation there is if he doesn't know what that is, or vice versa? And then, like, a big thing is psychological recovery is a part of full recovery. That is very important because the mental part is the most important part besides the body. And those two things have to be worked in tandem whenever it comes to rehabilitation. Otherwise, the athlete will never go back to the same way that they were before. And that's it. Thank you.